author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's show, we're talking Joe Biden, democracy versus republic, Donald Trump at the Supreme Court, and a whole lot more. It's going to be quite the show. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Election year is upon us once more, 2024. How are the main contenders' campaigns going? What are the highs? What are the lows? And what are the hurdles to be expected? We're very fortunate to have joining us once again on Liberty Nation Radio, Liberty Nation's chief political correspondent, Mr. Graham J. Noble. Thanks for being here, Graham.
It's a pleasure, Mark.
So, Graham, we both watched the President Joe Biden's Valley Forge speech. I know what I thought of it, and I'm sure the great American public out there know what they think of it. But as Liberty Nation's chief political correspondent, give us your take.
Well, Mark, it was an interesting speech. I mean, I will say, and perhaps this is the most complimentary thing I can say, is that of all of the speeches Joe Biden has given since he's been in the White House, this was possibly at least the most coherent in terms of you could understand what he was actually saying about 90% of the time. And he did clearly kind of wander off script once or twice, but it wasn't the kind of disaster that his speeches so often are. So I'll give him that much. But in terms of the content of the speech, it was, of course, the most notable thing about it, as I wrote for the pages of LibertyNation.com, was that this is probably the first time in living memory that an incumbent president gave a campaign speech that did not at all mention his record so far as president.
I mean, I can take a guess why. Let's be honest, right? The fact is, before he became president in 2020, the thing that he had going for him with the voting public was that he wasn't Donald Trump, and he was an unknown quantity. And he was, I'm not going to be Donald Trump. I'm going to govern differently. And there was nobody who could say, well, you can't criticize how he's governing, because yes, he's been in Washington, D.C. longer than there's been a Washington, D.C., basically. Not really, but he's been vice president, he's been a senator, but we've never seen him as president, so we don't know how he'd govern. And now, 3 years down the line, everybody can see very, very well how he's governed, and therefore he refuses to talk about how he's governed during it's the first campaign speech of 2024. That should be an important note, shouldn't it, Graham? That should be setting the tone for the whole year, shouldn't it?
You would think so. You would think his opening speech would have been like, this is what I've done. This is what we've achieved. This is how great things are. You know, it's interesting, Mark, because I thought back to the single presidential campaign between then President Jimmy Carter and the Republican challenger, Ronald Reagan. And of course, Reagan famously asked the question during the debate, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Well, okay, so Joe Biden couldn't use that exact line because he's so far, we're 3 years into his presidency. But even then, he wouldn't have been able to ask the question, are you better off? I suspect if he'd tried to play on that question at all, he would have changed it around and he would have just simply said, you are better off than you were 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's very much...
You may not believe it because the media is not telling you the truth, but trust me, you are better off.
Yeah, it comes to something when a Democrat supporting media, a Democrat supporting fourth estate, has to be told off by the administration that you're not doing enough to get our message out there. And the reality is they are. You know, if that is their chief goal, the media's chief goal is to to bolster Joe Biden, they're doing it. And a big round of applause to them for doing it the very best that they can with the tools that's been provided. Now, let's talk a little bit about this this speech again. So I want to get into the content of it, but let's talk the setting first. And there's something that I have to get off my chest about this. So it was at Valley Forge. Now, I'm sure everybody knows that this was the overwintering place for George Washington and all the soldiers.
Well, everybody except people who are currently in college and school, they probably don't know, but everyone else knows.
So this was, and it's become a symbol, very, very much so, of how the valiant defenders of freedom, they've put themselves into this freezing, bitter, cold winter. This isn't Florida in winter. This isn't Florida. This is Valley Forge. This is cold. And it really tells you something about their resolve to deal with such unnaturally cold, frigid weather and hardship. And now, here's the thing, right? Joe Biden was supposed to speak on January the 6th, the anniversary of January 6th. But they moved it a day forward. Why?
Because it was going to be too cold.
It was going to be too cold. The weather was going to be bad, so they decided not to go to Valley Forge. For me, Graham, that is everything that speech represented. I couldn't get over that. And the fact that nobody's mentioning that, it just blows my mind. Anyway, talk to me about the content of the Valley Forge.
No, that's actually some great insight, Mark, and I will cop to the fact that that thought itself did not occur to me when I was writing the article.
Oh, see, the original, not just a pretty face in here.
But that is a great point, actually. Yes, very, very apropos. Well, the speech itself was we've already said that he didn't mention his record at all, and instead he spoke about. It was very much a kind of a fear-mongering speech where he was warning about, democracy being on the line and we would lose our democracy. But here's the thing: he very much focused, of course, on Trump, and he said a number of things in that speech about Trump that just simply are not true. It's not a matter of opinion; it's a matter of if you look at the facts, if you compare what he said about Trump and then look at what really happened, those things are simply not true. A number of falsehoods, let's say, he put forwards, like on January 6, 2021, everyone was pleading with Trump to, go on television and tell his supporters to, leave peacefully and, wrap it up. And he actually did so. He did go on television and say that, but Joe Biden, kind of insisted that Trump refused to do that. And one of the remarkable things that got me was that he actually accused Trump of, and he's not the only person who's done this. I've seen this in a couple of other media outlets. They reported on a post that Trump put up on the Truth Social network. And this was in I believe in 2022. Trump posted on the Truth Social network. What he posted was a warning. He basically went back to the results of the 2020 election, which he still insists, as many of his supporters still insist, that was a fraudulent election result. And he went back to that and he said, if this fraud is allowed to stand, then, potentially that allows for the termination of all rules and regulations and articles, including those in the Constitution. So he was warning that could happen. But Joe Biden actually twisted his words completely around and presented it as him, Trump, saying that he intended to terminate the Constitution, which was, just a dreadful, misrepresentation of the truth.
It's funny that the more somebody gets misrepresented by having their words twisted, it's because people fear the truth that they might be saying. And so that gives you an idea of where the trajectory is heading. We'll be back with Graham Noble after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with Liberty Nation's chief political correspondent, Graham J. Noble. Earlier in the show, we were talking about Joe Biden's kickoff campaign speech in Valley Forge and how he essentially forwent the opportunity to talk about his record in office and instead decided to warn about the dangers of Donald Trump. Now, Graham, thanks for coming back. I'm reminded of just now thinking that a lot of Joe Biden's speech there was about democracy, and this appears to be the current thread, the pre-approved title of the Democrats' 2024 campaign, Democracy 2.0. But it was Jeanne Shaheen, the New Hampshire senator, U.S. senator, Democrat senator. And I'm going to give you the quote here, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. "A democracy, if you can keep it," said Ben Franklin. Now, what do you make of that?
She has since deleted it because she got a lot of pushback on that, because of course that's not what Ben Franklin said. On that particular day, he was leaving the the Philadelphia convention, and a lady asked him something along the lines of what have you come up with? What kind of government have you given us, Mr. Franklin? And he turned around and said, "A republic, if you can keep it." And of course, there is a huge difference between a republic and a democracy, because a republic gives you it's a federal republic. We have different states that have a certain amount of autonomy, and all those states are represented. And in the days when the Senate works the way it was supposed to work originally, of course, we had two senators from each state, and their job was not to represent the people. Their job was to represent their states. The House of Representatives represents the people. But anyway, and this is a system that allows for equal representation among all of the, well, of course, the now 50 states, as opposed to the original 13. But that is not a democracy. We do not have majority rule as such in this country. And of course, that's why the Democrats have often been trying to get rid of the Electoral College and replace it with the national popular vote, which would make this country into a it
would make it into California.
It would make it into it would make it into an awful place, because then it's funny their argument. I don't want to get too into the weeds of this argument, Electoral College between popular vote, but I mean, they always say that the Electoral College means that certain states, the smaller states, they have more of a say than they deserve because of their size and their populations. But of course, if you go to the popular vote, then our presidents will always be chosen by those small group of the most popular states, and all the rest of the states, the votes from all of the people in all the rest of the states won't matter at all.
Yeah, the reason I brought that up is because it seems there's no currency, it seems, for Democrats to say, what's at stake this time around? The republic, because that would be a completely different message, wouldn't it? Rather than what's at stake this time around, democracy.
Yeah.
How does that work? I mean,
I'm
trying to keep Donald Trump off the ballot in so many states anyway. That's hardly democratic.
The semantics of it are very interesting, because of course, if they campaigned on the republic is at stake, then they would actually sound like Republicans. They would sound,
funny that, isn't
it? So therefore they have to keep going on about this democracy, and they're trying to kind of convince everyone that democracy is the important thing here. Now, of course, we do have a democratic system of electing presidents, because everyone does actually get to vote. So there's obviously an element of democracy in there, but it is not. We don't operate upon direct democracy here in the States. It's a federal republic, and so It is. I mean, right now, I would say that in 2024, the Republic is at stake. But because the Republic is at stake, that also means the entire system, the Electoral College and people's votes, everything is at stake.
Yeah, there's a lot of and now I mean there are good arguments for having a basic representative democracy over a constitutional republic. There's good arguments for it on both sides, I guess. But if
Well,
you're
wasn't
running,
it wasn't it perhaps Winston Churchill who once
yes,
said that, there's not exact quote, but he more or less said democracy is a horrible idea, but it's just better than all the others.
yeah, it's except for all the others, it's the worst possible form of governance that you've got, except for all the others. Um, but there are a lot of things that come with a republic, and it really is. You've got, as you point out, you've got the Electoral College, you've got the equal representation in the Senate. There's the House of Representatives that deals with, hey, we're a more populous state, therefore we get more representation. That kind of levels it out. It was a really well designed system by the
It was.
founders,
It was.
shockingly well designed, because like Canberra, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Australian capital city, but it was a tiny city of 30,000 people soon after its creation, essentially. But then it grew to 300,000 in quite a short time. And you couldn't tell the difference because it was built to be expanded. And that really, for me, that's also the Constitution of the United States of America, that the systems by which the country operated under with 13 states, it was designed to be expanded and to account for all the things. And I think that President Joe Biden, and I mean, I'm not just singling out Democrats on this, because let's be fair, there are very few stalwart defenders of the Constitution in either party
That is
uh,
true.
in, in Congress at the moment.
Yep.
Um, but it really seems to me that they're looking to change what the country is, and they don't have a mandate for that. They have what Joe Biden has been ruling from the executive with the barest majority in the Senate. I mean, for the first 2 years, the tie-breaking vote was his vice president, and now he's lost the House as well. But he's still governing as though he has. And Tim Donner, Liberty Nation senior political editor, analyst, he says all the time he's governing as though he's got a super majority mandate, and he doesn't. And that is, I feel that's to the detriment of the country.
One thing I've noticed on the left, coming out of the left and in certain media outlets, is this idea that the current system of government we have is really dangerous. The system itself is kind of a threat to, again, democracy, because it allows a what they describe as a minority, a kind of a right-wing extreme minority, and by that basically they mean everyone who supports Trump, is this dangerous right-wing minority who actually get to have a say. And that in itself is a threat to democracy, which of course is ridiculous, because if you're saying that any one group of people should be silenced, then perhaps you are the threat to democracy.
Yeah, well, the smallest, most important voice within a democracy, or in fact a constitutional republic, is as ever the individual. Graham J. Noble, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thanks, Mark.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
The case against former President Donald Trump in Georgia has taken a rather peculiar turn with a recent filing by Mr. Michael Roman. We're very fortunate to have with us Scott DeCasenza, Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, host of the excellent Uprising podcast, and a man who I have sprung this very topic on not 10 minutes ago and asked him to be an expert for me. So any confusion is my fault, not his. Scott, welcome back to the show.
Well, with that lead in, how can we go wrong, Mark? Cheers.
We're bound to go wrong. We're bound to go wrong on this. Now, I've been looking at this all morning. This case in Georgia, this filing in Georgia, and essentially, it seems to me that Mr. Roman, through his lawyers, are claiming that the Fulton County District Attorney Fannie Willis, who, correct me if I'm wrong here, is the person behind the prosecution of Donald Trump in Georgia. Without her, there wouldn't be a prosecution. Is that right to say?
Yes.
Yeah.
She has decided by herself to prosecute Donald Trump and then took the steps to do it. And she has the power to because of her position. And that's exactly right.
Okay, so this filing today on behalf of Mr. Roman, who is a fellow, he is not a co-defendant, but he's a fellow criminal defendant under the same indictment that Donald Trump is regarding election machinations, I guess, during
Part of the same
2020.
gang of Confederates who
Sure. And this will
feloniously.
Here's some foreshadowing for you. Under the same RICO Act. Let's keep that in mind. There's some foreshadowing there for our listeners. So anyway, it's being alleged that she is engaging in an affair with the special prosecutor who is prosecuting the case, Mr. Nathan Wade. Now, we think
feathered his
Yes.
nest and hers with money that she gets to dispense for work performed on the prosecution's behalf.
Exactly right. That's the crux of the issue. Well, that's one of the cruxes of the issue.
Right?
Like,
And then there's another one.
Can you have two
Right.
cruxes? Cruxapodes, if it's a fourth declination Latin noun. So you have this first thing where it alleges that she's materially benefiting because they're taking trips to the Caribbean together, holidays, things like this.
The numbers are staggering. The guy's making like 30 grand a month off this prosecution is basically what the numbers look like.
Yeah, I believe it's somewhere in the region of $600,000 to $700,000 so far. Now, I should point out that the budget for Fulton County District Office altogether, I think, is about 30 million. So that gives you an idea that this is an actual percentage of the money, right? This is a significant percentage.
Mark, you
of
say
the
that
money.
like getting Donald Trump is somehow lesser than prosecuting all the murderers, thieves, and rapists in Fulton County. You
Yes.
know, this is a political decision that the people of the Fulton County Judicial District have made, that they want personnel in office who does whatever they can to get Donald Trump, and the law be damned, and their own physical safety and the prosecution of criminals in their area be damned. Getting Trump is where that office has put all of its efforts and principal efforts and spending, and that's what they're getting.
It appears that they might not end up very happy with it. So I've been looking into all these things. So the first allegation here is that she's essentially benefiting. Is it called like a good
Mark,
faith
I want to interrupt
benefit?
you. I want to interrupt you just to make a point very
Please.
explicitly, because I kind of alluded to it, but I want to be as clear as I can. It's totally improper for any prosecutor, whether they are trying to enforce some kind of abortion ban across state lines for somebody who's not in their district, for instance, or to prosecute Donald Trump, whether it's for the emoluments cause in Washington, D.C., or this charge in Georgia, that these prosecutors don't attend to the real needs of the prosecutions in their district. They need people to put away and do a good job with charging the people who've committed crimes in their districts. And it's so much harder to do that, right? To really do the good, hard work of prosecuting cases rather than to make political points and then be celebrated on the national political circuit of whatever group that you're a part of.
I mean, there's I don't think anybody's kidding themselves that Miss Willis is aiming for a higher office somewhere down the line. Now let's get into the weeds a little bit on this. So not only is there the allegation of financial impropriety here, there's also, I mean, it actually goes much deeper. So I think a lot of people could imagine, well, they're both consenting adults. All right, we get that. But it's the suit alleges that Mr. Wade's appointment was not approved by the Fulton Board of Commissioners. Now, this is in the filing. I don't know if that's true or not. However, it would appear to be an outlandishly brazen attempt to say that it wasn't approved and then find out that it was.
Yeah. I would say that. So when I read the complaint, which I have skimmed through, it does not produce a great deal of facts that
Sure.
are
Absolutely.
verifiable about the impropriety that's alleged. It's a lot of rumor and innuendo, which may represent facts that are in existence or may represent just merely rumor and innuendo, which is why we look scantly on rumor and innuendo when we evaluate these claims. I think that the claim that he wasn't somehow approved by this board seems tangential to me. And the reason why it seems tangential, Mark, is because in all my experience, in every area where there's an elected prosecutor, like here, that prosecutor may, at their discretion, appoint deputies to conduct prosecutions. And so,
Scott, you know what? I absolutely agree with you. However, I do want to play devil's advocate on this, if I may. It is down to the discretion of the person in charge of the case. However, it seems that there are people within the Georgia district who specialize in prosecuting RICO cases. They actually have people who are, this is what they do. And
so
then
let me just put a
Mr.
pin in it
Wade,
because I don't know that you've explained it exactly right for
Sorry.
people. I just want to make sure that they understand what the complaint alleges. The point that you're making is that they basically took a newbie, a guy who doesn't know how to prosecute and RICO is Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organizations Act, which is a very complex. First of all, that's the name of the federal legislation that the Georgia legislation was modeled after, but it's still called the same thing. It's a complex way to prosecute basically mafia families and gangs. That's why it was implemented, because the people at the tops of those organizations were hard to get to if their underlings didn't testify against them, basically. So that's the thing used against Trump. It is a complicated way to prosecute someone. You wouldn't give that against the former president of the United States with international focus on the prosecution to a neophyte, a person who doesn't know that cold, right? So it does make sense to say, why is this being done here? And to me, Mark, that is evidence that she acted inappropriately, meaning for her own pecuniary interest, right? For her own money gain, or to help out her friend who then lavishes gifts on her. Where the complaint talks about Caribbean cruises and international travel. So, but the act itself of appointing someone who hasn't received the approval of this other thing, which is the entree to this charge of inappropriateness, I don't see that as likely holding a significant amount of water because of the ability for these attorneys, these prosecuting attorneys, to have deputies who perform their prosecution function.
Yeah, I guess that's the point I was trying to really make there, that it signifies something to have somebody who does not have experience to prosecute.
It's evidence of the corruption. Yeah. Absolutely right. Yeah. It's like, and you gave this job to a guy who shouldn't have been given the job. It's one thing if she said, yeah, listen, I fooled around with the guy, but he's my number one ace in the whole prosecutor. Like, even though that is inappropriate, okay, for her to have personal sexual relationship with one of her direct reports like that, you can at least see, at least she's applying the best best resources of her office to this problem. But you don't even get that. Instead, you get a political prosecution driven not by the best interests of the citizens of the Fulton County Judicial District, but also poorly done in order for the purpose of feathering her nest and her friend's nest. That's the crux of the complaint.
And we'll see how that plays out as and when the judge responds. Scott DeCosenza, thanks very much. We will be back with Scott after this short break discussing Donald Trump's potential immunity. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back here on Talking Liberty, Liberty Nation Radio with Scott DeCosenza. Now, Scott, the case I really want to talk about, and I think this is going to turn into one of the biggest stories of the year, and that is a bold statement for early January, but still one of the biggest stories of the year, is Donald Trump's immunity claims. Now, as we're recording, he's actually in a D.C. circuit courtroom making the case that he should be immune to the prosecutions of Jack Smith, special counsel Jack Smith, in the case related to January 6th. Do you think the D.C. judges will, just based on your knowledge of D.C. courts, do you think that they will deny his claims of immunity? Yes or no?
before I give you an answer to your question, I think it's important to lay out what his claim is, because
Sure.
it's been wildly misrepresented.
Yes. Yes, it has.
That Donald Trump claims basically he can do any act and therefore and not be prosecuted for it because he was president of the United States.
Before you jump in on this, Scott, before you jump in, I do want to point out that on Fox News this morning, I was watching Fox News this morning, the day he goes to court, and the reporter on there, she mentioned that essentially the question that everybody's asking is that, well, if he gets immunity, surely a president in future will just be able to commit any crime. And I thought, that is the worst possible take. Please explain why.
And it's not what Donald Trump is asserting. What he is asserting is that when the president of the United States acts as president, they are immune from criminal prosecution for the acts of the presidency that they take in furtherance of the office, because that basically constitutes a kind of federal supremacy, if you will. So what Donald Trump means is, in his filing, if he picks up the phone and says we should do this or that, or make a speech, for instance, not gun down a clerk at a 7-Eleven in order to rob the till after dark. Okay,
don't give Donald Trump ideas, Scott. Don't give Donald Trump ideas.
Claim of immunity.
Yep.
What the claim of immunity is, for instance, part of the prosecution of Donald Trump involves him not acting, meaning like they have said that his failure to pick up the phone and call whomever and say whatever after he realized there was violence at the Capitol building, in part constitutes his criminality. So, for instance, not doing that is the function of the executive. Who to call and how to address them in the execution of the duties of President of the United States heretofore has been the sole province of the President of the United States to decide. Mr. Smith thinks that there's some other legal standard involved, and part of Trump's claim against these charges is that immunity basis, that he can't be prosecuted for acts of the president.
So it seems to me that to successfully deny Donald Trump's claims of immunity, you have to sort of go into the existential world and say that there is an office of the president that doesn't involve the president, but it's an existing thing that requires care and attention.
Doesn't involve the person, right?
Yeah, it doesn't involve the president. But it requires care and attention from the person who is caretaking that office at a time, which kind of it's almost that there's almost a philosophical bent to having to get your mind around this idea that Donald Trump was not in the office of the president. He was merely representing the office of the president, but he represented it in a bad way.
This is a good exercise for you to conduct because of your familiarity with the royals. I imagine there's a similar kind of vestige of the royal family, right, or the sovereign, regardless of whether it's the person who occupies that office.
Well, that's the thing. It actually there is an answer to that. Is because whatever family killed the last lot of the last family, I believe it was the Hanovers were the last one, or they married through into the Windsors, doing it backwards. Hanover, Windsor, Hanover, Stuart, Tudor, Lancaster, Norman Plantagenet.
Wow.
Just doing it backwards.
Go.
It rests with the family that beat up the last family, essentially. So it's the person. It's the person. It's not. There's not some sovereign thing that exists beyond. It's a person. It's a family there. And so
I thought it was like the crown.
That's the thing, right? The person who steals the crown is then the holder of the crown, right? So So the point here is that it's up in the court. It's up in the DC Circuit Court. Your thoughts
arguments are being presented as
oral arguments.
Yes. I think that they will say that Donald Trump is susceptible to prosecution on this and does not enjoy immunity. Okay. And I believe that there's a colorable legal argument for that. I mean, a lot of these issues surrounding Trump's prosecutions and legal wranglings over the ballot access issues as well, there are often valuable legal arguments on both sides. They're clouded by the kind of ridiculous politicizing of the issues, I think, and in some cases those are generated, at their birth. They're kind of tainted in their conception with these political things. Like I think probably the Georgia prosecution, for instance, among other things, and Jack Smith's prosecution as well. But that doesn't mean that there aren't valuable or interesting, real legal issues at stake there. Whether, what the president is immune for instance, is an interesting question to me. And
can I delve into that a little bit, please, Scott? So I was considering earlier what crimes Donald Trump is seeking immunity from, and I was thinking that surely there's got to be a division in the types of crime. So, for example, obviously, as you said, he can't go to a 7-Eleven and gun down the cashier as much as he may want to. But what's happening is he's being charged with 91 different crimes over 4 indictments, and some of these are purely novel uses or applications of the law. And that strikes me as, if he's got immunity for anything, it would be for the cases where there's a novel application of the law, because there'd be nobody to say, you know what, Mr. Trump, you can't do that. President Trump, you can't do that. His advisors couldn't tell him, you can't do that, because that's going to run afoul of a law that's going to be novelly applied to you at some point in the future. Right. Does that make sense?
It does make sense that it's a problem. And the reason why is because of the tortured nature of how we got to where we are, which is to say that the federal government, as conceived, only had a very few criminal laws. The large majority of criminal prosecutions and prohibitions are at the state level. And of course, now the body of federal criminal laws is so large that scholars and researchers can't even produce with any kind of validity the total number of federal criminal laws. Like, what do we have to do to not be criminals in the United States? It's impossible for the average person to discern and determine.
Yeah, so I believe there's a book called 4 Felonies a Day or something.
Indeed, yeah, 4 felonies a day. And it documents how we all do commit these felonies because we don't even know what the law is, and they are away from the common law. So that's a great thing that you said to get me back on point, Mark, which is common law crimes are what our society started prosecuting. And you don't need to be a lawyer or read law books to know that you shouldn't burn someone else's houses down or rape or murder them, for instance. Okay, these are not the finer points that we need to discern. But for instance, how was Donald Trump to know that that the law required him? Because this is what Mr. Smith and Mr. Biden's prosecution team is alleging, that Donald Trump had the legal duty to pick up the phone and say certain words to certain people within the federal government, or then he was a criminal. That's literally part of their claim. So it is a novel application of the law and a novel claim against the president. And certainly I believe it was impressed upon the courts to satisfy a political need rather than a criminal justice need. And yet still, the question remains, what is the president immune from regarding local state and local prosecutors?
It's fairly clear that the D.C. Circuit Court won't say, you know what, Donald, you're in the clear, mate, on your way. I don't think that's going to happen. You don't think that's going to happen. Nobody seriously thinks that's going to happen. However, once that's done, it then goes to the Supreme Court, right?
An appeal, whether it's Mr. Smith or whether it's Mr. Trump, the loser at the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals will file in the United States Supreme Court. Whether the Supreme Court then decides to take that case and rule on it, that may be another matter.
So give us a prediction, Scott. What happens at the Supreme Court?
Mark, that is, I don't issue predictions.
One day I'll get you to do
outrageous. My prediction is that the Supreme Court will try to draw some broad lines about presidential immunity, and also articulate, if the case reaches there on this basis, that the president is not required to pick up the phone and call anyone and do anything as a function of remaining a non-criminal.
Yeah, I think everybody's glad that could be the rule, that, you're not required to do anything to stop being a criminal. Scott DiCosenza, we'll keep a close eye on this on the page of libertynation.com. Thank you ever so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's just about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guests for today, Mr. Graham J. Noble, Chief Political Correspondent, and Legal Affairs Editor Scott DiCosenza, for joining us and taking the time to inform and entertain. And of course, I'd like to thank you, the listeners at home, for tuning in for this each and every week. Thanks for being here.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7, with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are LibertyNation.com.